This episode is made possible by the generosity of our listeners. Thank you.
Welcome to the Creation Science
For Kids
show. Life was perfect, but God knew there was something special coming. How did he make sure Adam would appreciate what God had planned when the right time came? Plus, we explore our God-given role as scientists in understanding and shaping the world we were put in charge of. Then, we examine how a part of the fossil record actually lines up with evolutionary just-so stories, and finish up with a close-up look at the biggest of all man's animal helpers, the elephant. Praise the Lord. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart, in the company of the upright, in the congregation. Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them. Full of splendor and majesty is his work, and his righteousness endures forever. He has caused his wondrous works to be remembered. The Lord is gracious and merciful. Psalm 111, verses 1 through 4. This is episode 51 of the podcast where we learn about Jesus, our Creator, and his amazing world. Hi, I'm Sherry Fields, your host, and I'm joined today by my co-host Stephen.
Hi.
And Joseph.
Hello.
To follow along with what we're looking at, check out the show notes, creationscience4kids.com/naming. So we're up to Genesis 2, and we're going to read verses 19 and 20. We already know that God didn't want Adam to be alone. So now we're going to look at the process God took Adam through so that Adam would realize it wasn't good for him to be alone either. Joseph, would you read for us these two verses?
And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found an help meet for him.
Thank you, Joseph. There are quite a number of thoughts in here. First of all, what was God asking Adam to do? God?
Name the animal.
Right. God did the work to bring the animals to Adam, but did God say, hey, here's a deer, here's a cat? No. He left that for Adam. That's a very important idea. First of all, this is a major branch of science, and it's one that's constantly shifting and being adjusted. Do you know what it's called, the science of naming animals, living things?
No.
Taxonomy. And there are quite a few places where you can find out what's going on in when you discover a new species. You can name it whatever you want. So a lot of animals are named after the people who discover them or people that they honor. There's even a spider that almost only eats a special sort of, it's not a fruit, something that an acacia tree puts out that has all the fat and protein and nutrients that the spider needs. So it almost never eats bugs. And it's named the Bagheera spider because at the time, what would have been a popular story with a character named Bagheera? He helped Mowgli out.
The panther?
Uh-huh. What story is that in?
The Jungle Book.
The Jungle Book. So the scientists had been reading the Jungle Book, and they actually named a number of different spiders and things after different characters from the Jungle Book. So taxonomy is something that scientists are doing all the time today, and they're constantly shifting where they put animals and group them. And
The Wild Brothers did that. They found
That's
a
right.
moth.
Right.
And they named it the Wildy moth or something.
Did they
like
really?
that.
They named it after them? You know, I never did watch that episode. I should do that. Yeah, right here in these verses, we find the very first scientist, and his name was
Adam.
That's right. Our first forefather, our first daddy, was a scientist. I also like what it tells us about God and his relationship to us. He could have given all the names. He'd obviously given Adam a language. He was able to communicate with Adam and Adam with him. And Adam had to have the ideas and sounds to mean those ideas in order for him to name the animals. So God had given him a bunch of tools. But then he said, here, Adam, here are the tools, here are the animals. What are you going to do with them? He both gives us what we need, but then waits for us to be creative. God loves it when we take what he's given us and do something with them. Whether that's building a beautiful building or making music with the sounds he's given to us, he loves it. It's something he wants us to do. And that was true for Adam. It's still true today. So whenever we create something, when we make a piece of art or come up with a poem or whatever it is, it's something God is pleased with. Isn't that a cool idea?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Now, last year, I wrote a pretty long article, and I won't read the whole thing because it'll take a while. But I ran into an idea by people who want to believe what man is saying about science, those who deny that God is real. And these people want to believe in God and Jesus, but don't want to accept what the Bible has to say about when and how he created. So here's one of the things that they say. This is from a book published by Moody Press not that long ago. And the guy who wrote it said, "Who can imagine that all of these transactions could possibly have taken place in 120 minutes of the sixth day, or even within 24 hours for that matter?" He really believed that what was described in Genesis 2 had to have taken more. Why does he believe that? What does he say?
Who can imagine?
What's that mean? What did he think was more important? What God tells us he did in Genesis chapter 2, or what the author thought?
The author thought.
Yeah, it's a very important concept. We are pretty smart, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
But are we as smart as God?
No.
Mm-mm.
Even close?
No.
No. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are God's thoughts than ours. This man, writing about the Old Testament for Moody Press, thought his ability to imagine had more weight and authority than God's word. If he recognized that, when he does, that will be a terrifying thought. So I went through and found out what could have happened and whether it's possible for us to think of and imagine a way that it could have happened in a single day. Let's say the typical day has 12 hours. If God waited until 6 in the morning to make the animals, then how long would it have taken God to make some animals?
Half a millisecond.
Right. It wouldn't have taken him any time at all. He'd been thinking about it for eternity. So all he had to do was say, "Let there be animals," and there they were. So that didn't take very long at all. Then he puts Adam together again. He didn't have to take very long to put Adam together and breathe into his nostrils a breath of life. Then the first thing he did was put him in the garden. And then the next thing was have him name the animals. Now we finally get something. Well, explaining how to take care of the garden might have taken a little bit of time. But how many animals would Adam have need to name? Can you guess?
Well, if we had
100?
What's that?
It's like one of every kind, but not like one dog. It's one dog.
Right. Do you remember what the difference is, what we call them? Today, when we're doing taxonomy, we're usually naming species. That's getting pretty specific. And that's like, the way we do some of it, it'd be like calling tabby cats one species and calling, black cats a different species, or having Labradors be a different species from the Chihuahuas. They sure look different. That kind of thing. The species level, yeah, there are gazillions of. What do we call the basic kinds that we believe that the Bible tells us God made? Do you remember?
No.
Kinds. So we need to figure out how many kinds of animals God would have created. Okay, here's what it says there. God formed the beasts and the fowl. And then it says Adam gave name to the cattle, the fowl of the air, and every beast of the field. So those are the things that he named. Right there, we don't need all the names for bugs.
Right.
Or the sea creatures.
Right.
Or even things like lizards and the small, because like a beast of the field, that phrase would not apply.
Mouse or something?
Possibly. When I listed it, I included mice. I don't know. If you take the number of animals, that already shrinks it down quite a bit. one of the things that's really great is, and I point this out in the article, because Answers in Genesis was already planning on the Ark encounter where they wanted to really nail down what would be a reasonable number of animals for Noah to take on the Ark. And the kinds of animals that Adam named would have been all on the Ark, their representatives. They went through a list, and here's what they said. With our worst case scenario approach, calculating the number of animals on the ark, this would mean that Noah cared for approximately 7,000 animals. And that's including multiples. First of all, you can have that because you had a male and a female. And Adam didn't have to give different names to the mommies and the daddies. And then he had extra of the clean animals. So that would be 3,500 animals would already have been more than Adam needed. So here's what an article in Answers Journal said. This suggests that closer to 350 mammal kinds were on the ark. 350 isn't that bad, is it?
Nope.
Now that includes the bats and monotremes and marsupials. So things that he might not have even had to name. So that's a high number. Then you have the fowls of the air. What do we call those? Birds and anything that flies. So the bats would have been in there, but we've already listed them. And then what else would be a flying thing in the air besides a bird that went extinct?
Dinosaurs.
Yeah, what do we call them? Do you remember?
Pterodactyls.
Yeah, the pterosaurs, including the pterodactyls. I had fun looking that up. And there's a place a website just about pterosaurs. And they said there seems to be 8 main branches. So he would have only needed to name at most 8 pterosaurs, including giving pterodactyls a name. And then for the birds, going back to another Answers research article, Dr. Jean Leitner came up with about 196 kinds of birds. That's one of the things when I was looking it up myself. They are constantly having to revise how they sort and organize and list birds' names. There's one lady, her name is Lee, and she has Lee's Birds Watching Adventures. I love looking at her blog. She has beautiful pictures. And she lists 241 kinds. So that's still not very many. One of the things that I had some trouble finding were birds that we only know from the fossil record. Can you think of one that's quite famous because they want it to be a sort of dinosaur bird?
Archaeopteryx.
Archaeopteryx, right. It was much harder to find out how many different birds like Archaeopteryx there were. The best I could find was on Wikipedia, and they listed 43 different families. That's not very many. No. So if you put all those together, you get a list of only about 634 different creatures for Adam to name. That's quite a few animals, but Is it crazy to think of naming that many in a day?
Yes.
Okay, here's something we haven't mentioned yet. Adam was smart. He had just been freshly made, so his brain was in full running gear. Think Einstein on caffeine. That's how smart he is.
That sounds dangerous.
Yes. Now think, somebody that smart, fresh and happy, can he name 634 creatures in a day?
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you calculate, give him about 15 seconds to name an animal. So he looks at it for 10 seconds and thinks, here's an interesting descriptor, and I can add on this and name it Fuzzy Long Ears. What would that be?
Koala?
Long ears.
Oh, elephant.
Fuzzy long ears. Nah, elephant. How about Gray Mountain or something like that? Okay, let's see if you can come up with a name of an animal and see if I can guess it.
Waggy tail.
Waggy tail.
Puppy.
Yeah, he's thinking of a dog, but I don't think Adam would have named it. That would have been a little hard to say each time. Come here.
No, it's fuzzy long ears, wagging tail.
I see. That would take a while. That sounds more like the Welsh or the American Indians with their super long names. It's possible. Can you think of one, Stephen?
Tusk attacker.
Attacker. This is before the fall. They didn't attack anything. So giant tooth.
Tusky.
Tusky. Yeah, that would have worked for...
Like
Well, he didn't have to name the walruses. And we're talking about the elephant. Yeah, it is hard to think of one that would work, or that would be short. Going back to how long it could have taken. If he had 15 seconds to name each animal, it would have taken less than 3 hours. Tim Chafee, that we met at the design studio, he wrote an article on this topic, and he decided to give him enough some breaks to grab a drink and a snack, so that he thought it would take about 4 hours. There was also an article in Creation Magazine that broke it down, saying there are 360 seconds in an hour. So Adam could have completed his task in under an hour if he just spit out a name. Bat, cat, rat. Like that, if he did it that quickly. But if he'd taken more time, he thought it just added that it could have taken a few hours. So if Adam was created early in the morning, because God doesn't dawdle, Adam could have been done well before noon, so that God would have plenty of time to give Adam a nice nap and a lovely afternoon and evening with his wife. So there's absolutely no problem when we put our minds under God's authority and then use it, rather than putting our minds in the judge's seat and decide whether we think the Bible is accurate or not. There's one other objection that people will say about these verses. They will say, well, this obviously is a contradiction from Genesis 1, where God creates the animals first and then creates man. Here, God has already created man, and then God is forming all the animals. In Hebrew, you cannot tell if it's happening now, if it happened in the past, or if it will happen in the future just by looking at the verbs. You can in English. You can say, he went, he is going, he will go. There isn't anything like that in Hebrew. So when it says, and out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field, we do not know that he did it in sequence after creating Adam. It can go back and say, well, God had already created the beasts of the field and then he brought them to Adam. There would be no way in Hebrew to make that perfectly clear. You have to just look at the context. So there's absolutely nothing stopping us from reading it that way when we don't want the Bible to be contradicting itself. God leaves enough room for the skeptic to refuse to see. But he gives plenty of evidence for those of us who are willing to listen. All right, there was one other thing I wanted to think about. What kind of animals would Adam maybe have seen and thought, oh, maybe this is the animal that will be a helper to help me in the garden and to do everything that God wants? What would have made him sit up straight and think, ooh, maybe this is the help that God has created for me?
Elephant.
Elephant, why? What does the elephant do for people?
It carries heavy stuff for them.
Right.
Sometimes.
Yeah, it can carry things on its back. There have even been war elephants carrying all the people who are riding on them. What else do they use elephants for?
Things for the circus.
Just to watch. Yeah, that's just to see such a giant creature moving around like that. But they are used in the jungle to move tree logs and help. Yeah, it's very good at moving heavy things. So elephants are very useful. What are other animals that we use when we don't have elephants? What about farmers? What kind of animals have been the most helpful for farmers through the years?
Oh,
Oxen.
And oxen are a member of which family?
The cow kind.
Right. If you're going
I
to
was thinking boars would.
boars, yeah, well, the pig family back when Adam was around, because he wasn't going to eat them, but they would have helped him find mushrooms. That would have been cool. Okay. What else do farmers use?
Horse.
The horse family, right. So that includes donkeys. Yeah, very useful. And then now that we have deserts, what helps move things from place to place? And they still use them.
Camels.
Camels. Okay, before we were eating them, I'm sure a dog would have been useful to keep track of the sheep that they needed for wool. Dogs are probably, when I thought of what animal would have been most likely to have thought, well, maybe this is the help that God's provided for me. The dog is a very useful animal, but can it replace another person?
No.
No. There were lots of animals that would have been really fun to name. Fascinating. I'm sure there was a lot of laughing going on, especially as Adam was being introduced to all these animals and seeing just how creative God was. It was probably a delightful time if we could have been there to see and experience it. But when the whole parade had come past and Adam had given names and practiced being a scientist, he was still
lonely.
Yeah. And we'll have to wait till next time we're in Genesis to finally give him his wife so he can have a family. All right. Now I wanted to have something for our middle section. And in the mail yesterday came the new Acts and Facts from the Institute for Creation Research. It is one of my favorites. First of all, I asked them to please let me have a paper copy so I don't have to be by the computer. Although if you live out of the United States or you want to save a tree, you can get it online. And near the back, I saw this headline and I thought, this is perfect. Here's the question.
Why do kangaroos live only in Australia?
You know, kangaroos are a special kind of animal. Where do they have their babies?
In their pouch.
In a pouch. Do you know what those kinds of animals are that have pouches for their babies?
Marsupials.
Marsupials. We only have one kind in North America. Do you know what it is?
I was about to say platypus.
We don't have platypuses in North America. We have the opossum. It has teeny tiny babies that crawl out of the mommy and when they're very small and go into the pouch, and that's where they finish developing. Most marsupials on the planet alive today live in Australia and nowhere else. So they're the kangaroos, and koala bears are also marsupials. And then there's also betongs and marsupial moles live in Australia. So can you guess what the evolutionists say happened so that Australia has all the marsupials and they're not anywhere else?
The ones that went there further evolved so that they could survive there.
Right. They would say an ancestor got to Australia somehow and then evolved into marsupials. Yes.
Survival of the fittest.
Now, here's the problem. Does evolution happen quickly?
No.
No. And what do they say? If you say, how do you know that these things evolved? What do they tell you? We know it's true because of what evidence? What do they look at and say, see, right there in front of your nose? I'll give you a hint. It's in the rocks.
Oh, radiometric dating.
No, they don't use radiometric dating to say evolved. What is it they look at and say, you can see this evolved into that, which evolved into that by looking at
fossils.
Fossils. Now,
which are found in the same place, right?
That's what's so cool. When you look at the fossil record for marsupials, you find none of them in Australia. You find them only in Eurasia and North America. That's Europe, Asia, and North America. In fact, the one that's dated the oldest, where they say the rocks are the oldest, we would say they were buried first, that looks remarkably like an opossum, comes from China. You don't find any marsupials in Australia in the fossil record. And you find normal mammals. They're called placental, where they have a placenta that helps them, where they have belly buttons and they stay inside their mommy. You find those in the Australian fossil record. So it's all exactly backwards. That means every story they have is only an idea. They have to say that the animals that used to be marsupials and lived in North America and across the northern part of the world all died out except the opossum. And that evolution caused the exact same kind of animal form to reform in Australia without having any common ancestor with the fossils. Is that very scientific?
No.
No, but they have to believe it. Okay, so what do we believe? What happened to the fossils? How did they get there?
The flood.
The flood came.
The flood. The flood provided extraordinary circumstances, almost never repeated anywhere else, to bury and preserve all these fossils, turn them into rocks. So it doesn't surprise us any that they're found in different locations than they are today, because we know all the living ones. Where did they first come onto dry land after the flood? Where were they?
Turkey?
Turkey, the edge of Turkey and Armenia. Yeah. And why Turkey?
Because it landed...
What landed?
Ark landed on the mountains of Ararat.
Right. We know, because God tells us in his Bible, that all the land animals that have breath survived on the ark. They're the only ones that made it. They all landed in one boat in the mountains of Ararat that are now in eastern Turkey, right up against Armenia. So how did the kangaroos get to Australia and not go anywhere else?
They hopped all over the ice.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. So again, we're having to guess as scientists. But yes, we know there was an ice age. It's obvious from the glacial record all over the earth, north and south. But here's what happened. It wouldn't have been the ice. That's a good guess. But remember, between Turkey and Australia, you're in the middle of the earth. It was not covered in ice there. However, when the ice age was in full swing, dumping mountains of snow that turned into ice and glaciers, what happened to the ocean? Do you know? It went down. The sea levels, and you can see that.
Oh, so like it went down.
Mm-hmm.
So they would just be hopping like
exactly. Yeah.
Like Moses.
Yeah, sort of. Except Moses had a wall of water on either side. But yes, if you look at a map or a globe that shows how deep the ocean is, you can tell that most of the ocean between the Thai Peninsula out to Australia is very shallow. If you look at the record, our best guess, and this is something both the secular scientists and creation scientists agree on, it looks like the ocean sank about 350 feet lower than it is now. That's how much ice was captured in the glaciers to the north and south. So for the most part, they could have hopped, like some of the marsupials stopped in New Guinea. Then it's a little deeper where there would have been some water to get to Australia, but they could have easily hopped onto some floating logs and gotten across, because you could have practically seen from that land bridge to Australia. So that's what we expect happened. And for whatever reason, God guided those animals, and they only went to Australia and stayed there. Pretty fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone, as scientists, has to guess. The secular scientists guess based on their thinking, what they will not look at, which is the idea of God and God doing miracles. We start with God's record. He tells us the flood happened. Only animals on the ark survived. And then we look at what we see today and say, okay, does it make sense for animals to have been on the ark and to have gotten to where they are now? And it's not very hard to see how God could have done it. All right. Now it's time to hear from you. What do you have for us today, Stephen?
Elephants.
All right.
Elephants' tusks are made so that they can break down trees and fight their enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And their trunks, some people think their trunks are just their nose, but it's not just that. It also helps them to eat and drink.
Okay, so elephant has a super long nose. We've all seen him. So how does it help them eat and drink?
This is how they drink. They fill their trunk up with its water, and they lift their trunk up to their mouth and drink.
Okay, yeah, because if they sucked it all the way up to their trunk to send it down their throat, what would happen? What happens if you try to drink with your nose? You would cough and splutter because it would try to go down your lungs. So they know how to get it up just far enough, and then they put it in their mouth because then it's easier to swallow without breathing it. Very cool. Now, how do they eat with their nose?
Well, they pick it up with their nose and reach it up to their mouth, and then they eat it.
Now, what's super cool about their trunk? Can you pick stuff up with your nose? Why not?
No. Because it's not that long.
Right, it's not long, but if we had a crazy long nose that just dripped down our face, would we be able to pick it up?
Yes.
No, we couldn't.
Wait,
Because it would just be floppy, like having hair hanging down. It would just get in the way. What do they have that keeps it from just being a floppy mess? What did God give them in their noses that we don't have? Do you know? Muscles. They have muscles so they can curve it up. And have you ever watched one pick up something small like a peanut? Okay, so the tip of their nose sticks out a little bit further down in the front and the back, so it works almost like two fingers, and they can actually pinch it together and pick up small things. Isn't that cool? So very much like our thumb and our first finger. All right, so you started out with their coolest features, which are their tusk and their trunk. What else is the most amazing thing about elephants?
Their ears are gigantic.
Right, they are. Why did God give them such big ears? What did they use them for? Did you read about that? Where do elephants live? Do they live up where it's cold?
No, where it's very hot.
Right.
Like Africa.
Right. And they have the biggest ears. The Asian elephants have smaller ears, but they still need them. The African ones have huge ears. They can use them for two things. What do they look like? Ladies used to use them when there wasn't air conditioning at church to keep so that they could pay attention to the pastor. Do you know?
So they could cool down.
Exactly. They could use them as a fan to actually blow air around their body. And also, they have lots of blood vessels. You can see in this picture. See the blood vessels coming out? They can run a bunch of blood out and cool it.
Oh, right.
So they can use it like a big radiator air conditioner. And today, since we can't seem to find any dinosaurs, if there are any alive, they're hiding in the jungles. What do we always say about elephants? What's special about them? Do they make good house pets?
No,
Why not?
because they can't fit in a house.
Why not?
They're way too big.
They are the biggest land animal alive on Earth today, as far as we can tell. They are the biggest land mammal, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So where do elephants live?
Africa and Asia today.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere else, they would be extinct.
Right. Yeah. Did you read about any of the extinct ones? They used to live during the Ice Age up where it's very cold now.
The one in the Ice Age, the only one I can think of that was in the Ice Age was the mammoth.
Mammoth. And the mastodon looked very much like the mammoth. Its tusks were different. And they lived all over the northern world. We keep finding them in the frozen tundra up in Siberia and in Alaska. Yeah. Anything else cool about them today?
Their tusks. They are gigantic.
They are. What are their tusks made out of? Are they hair like a rhino's?
The same thing as teeth because they practically are teeth.
Yes, they are special teeth. Yes. What do we call that kind of material that's considered very valuable?
It should be a type of vitamin.
No. Yeah, and they used to make piano keys out of it. And it's actually it's the biggest danger for elephants now. Do you remember what it's called?
No.
Ivory. Do you remember that now?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, their tusks for thousands of years have been considered very valuable to make beautiful things out of. That's why they kill them. The rest of the elephant, it's not good for food. They don't use the rest of its bones or anything. But those tusks are so valuable that people will kill them just for that and leave the rest to rot. And so there are fewer and fewer elephants. And that's very sad.
Yeah, only two kinds.
Yeah. Now, ivory is beautiful. I have some ivory earrings that I spent a lot of money to get. But did I use elephant ivory so they had to kill elephants to get it?
No.
Do you know what it is? At this store, and in fact in the United States, you're not allowed to sell elephant ivory or fresh elephant ivory. You can still resell the piano keys from 100-year-old pianos. Mine are made out of mastodon ivory. Isn't that cool?
What's a mastodon?
So mastodons are mammoth, like the mammoths. So it's still sad that the mastodon had to die, but it died thousands of years ago, not very long after the flood. So it's not like people made them go extinct. It's just the climate changed then, and it was very sad. But it's still beautiful what God made. Okay.
There's something else awesome about them.
Yeah.
Although there are two species of elephants,
right,
there are still a lot of elephants left.
Are
this
there?
book says there are 5,000 elephants living today.
Okay, well, that is a big number for a little boy. But do you have any clue how many bunny rabbits there are?
No.
Billions. There are 8 billion with a B people on Earth. So when you think about that, is 5,000 a very big number? There are hundreds of zoos around the world. If every zoo has 2 elephants, that's 1,000 elephants right there. Easy. So there are not very many elephants left. There are enough that if we're very, very careful with the ones that are still alive, they should be able to survive and have children and grandchildren for a long time. But if we aren't very careful right now, they could be gone in less than 100 years. And that would be very sad, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So like many things, we have to be super careful. They're not quite in as bad condition as the pandas and the red pandas, but they're almost that endangered.
Yeah.
Okay, now this book kind of is almost too detailed, and you've been reading it a lot. We've borrowed, what is this book you like?
Mission Elephant Rescue.
By the National Geographic. It has great pictures. But, well, maybe I'll just tell you what I know that's super cool about elephants. Do you know how long their babies grow inside their mommy's tummy?
No.
Do you know how long a human baby lives in its mommy's tummy?
I'm thinking a few weeks. That's what I know.
Almost 9 months. An elephant is inside of its mom for 2 years. That's part of the problem. It takes a long time for there to be a new baby elephant. And then she has to take care of her baby for quite a while. It takes them 2 years to learn to manage their trunk. Just like we have to learn to walk. They walk pretty quickly, but they still have a lot of trouble using their trunk to pick up what they need to so they can take care of themselves. They need their moms and their aunts and grandmas for quite a few years. So that's part of the problem. It takes a long time for a new generation to come up. Elephants are big. So if you look at their bones, their leg bones are super thick. They are the only mammal that can't jump because their bodies are so heavy. God designed them so that they wouldn't break their legs, but they cannot jump up in the air like we can. And do you know how long they live?
No.
They live over 50 years, about as long as we do. It's really cool. They live a long time. Oh, here's a great picture. Remember we talked about elephants helping with the logs? Here's one. This guy looks like he could be in Thailand is where he is. And he's got a harness around the elephant. And what is that he's using to pull the log?
Chain.
A chain is fastened to the log, and they're going out down the hill to take the log to the lumber mill.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to say about elephants? Why did you pick them?
I like them and they're very cute.
They're cute, huh? Especially that baby elephant with its big eyes. Yep, God worked hard to make them, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he figured out a way that you could have such a large animal that could still move around, and they can move pretty fast when they want to.
Yeah. This book even told me that.
Oh, yeah? How fast can they move?
But then it told me how fast they can
Just
move.
that they can move quickly?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, when you watch...
They almost can run.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and you certainly don't want to run into a mad daddy or a mad mom. Thank you, Stephen. Don't forget, you can find links to all the things we've talked about today by visiting the show notes page, creationscience4kids.com/naming or /051 for episode 51. While you're there, I'd like to ask for your help. If you know someone who might enjoy listening to this podcast and checking out my website, would you let them know for us? Every article I do, including today's show notes, has share buttons to make it super easy for you to pass on to your friends on Facebook or by email.
You have the amazing power to help your friend find out the truth with just a click of a button.
Plus, if you want to encourage us, leaving the show a rating on iTunes is a great way to do that and help families looking for new podcasts to find us.
Thanks.
Has your family signed up for my weekly email newsletter? Once a week, I share interesting creation resources I've run into, as well as the link to that week's article, which means you won't have to bother remembering how to find the show notes again. Plus, you'll get access to an amazing collection of kids' creation resources I've discovered over the past 5 years. Whether you want to play games, find a science curriculum, plan a vacation, or watch fun videos, you'll find the links in a flash on my page. You can sign up in a couple seconds from the show notes, but to see why I care so much about making creation science fun for kids, visit creationscience4kids.com/kids resources.
Do you like science? Got a subject you want to learn about? Or maybe telling stories?
Remember, it's super easy to turn your smartphone into a recorder. And if you send me a report, story, joke, or interesting idea, I might use it in a future show. Head over to creationscience4kids.com/podcast to find out what to do.
Well, this finishes up our show for the day. Until next time, have fun treasuring our amazing universe and creator.
Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. Revelation 4:11.